Welcome once again, my brothers and sisters, to another Living Hope Today's study. So thankful that you're here. Today we turn the page, so to speak. We begin our study of the book of 2 Samuel. You remember we ended 1 Samuel tragically, as Saul and his sons are all wiped out in a battle with the Philistines, killed. In fact, Saul ends up killing himself so that his body does not fall into abuse by the Philistines, although that happens anyway. His people come and rescue him from that. They cremate him. They now have a leaderless nation. There's no king. And as 2 Samuel begins, we start to see God now empowering the transition that will eventually put David on the throne. And as we begin we look today at the text, and we see that first things to happen here is the recounting of Saul's death. After the death of Saul, David returned from defeating the Amalekites and stayed in Ziklag 2 days. You recall, I hope, that David has been defending the town that he lives in successfully against the Amalekites. So the contrast continues, where Saul is experiencing total defeat and death. David experiences total victory and the restoration of life. All right, on verse 2 it says, "On the third day a man arrived from Saul's camp, with his clothes torn and with dust on his head. When he came to David, he fell to the ground to pay him honor." Again, David is portrayed as one worthy of honor. "Where have you come from?" David asked him, and he answered, "I have come from the Israelite camp." So the servant is saying he's been to the battlefield, basically. "What happened?" David asked. "Tell me," he said. "The men fled from the battle. Many of them fell and died." In other words, Israel has taken significant losses, and Saul and his son Jonathan are dead. Now this would hit David like a ton of bricks, not so much that Saul has died, although he's never touched the Lord's anointed, and therefore he knows God has moved to make this circumstance a reality. Nonetheless, Jonathan is David's best friend. I mean, they're closer than brothers. He loves Jonathan with a deep, deep love. To hear of Jonathan's death, after Jonathan himself was planning on helping David when David became king, if you recall those stories in 1 Samuel, now we see that God has decided Jonathan's not going to be there. There's going to be no threat to the throne. There's going to be no lineage left to Saul that could claim a rightful heir to the throne. They're all dead. But David still is going to feel the pain of that loss. Then David said to the young man who brought him the report, "How do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan are dead? Tell me the story." "Well, I happened to be on Mount Gilboa," the young man said, "and there was Saul leaning on his spear with the chariots and riders almost upon him." So this servant is now relaying the story from his perspective. "When he turned around and saw me, he called out to me and said, 'What can I do?' He asked me, 'Who are you?' 'An Amalekite,' I answered. And then he said to me, 'Stand over me and kill me. I am in the throes of death, but I'm still alive.'" Now you recall that this is fabrication, because at the end of 1 Samuel, what happens? Saul's armor bearer is asked by Saul to eliminate him, since he's been mortally wounded in the combat. Now this Amalekite here in 2 Samuel 1 is telling us, no, he was the guy that Saul asked to kill him because he was in the throes of death. The Amalekite is taking credit for the death of Saul. Perhaps he thinks that his story is going to gain him favor with David, thinking that David, as the future king, might be happy about the death of Saul. "So I stood over him and I killed him." Well, we know from the end of 1 Samuel in chapter 31 that Saul killed himself. He fell on his own sword. So here we know this Amalekite is making all this up. So I stood over him and killed him because I knew that after he had fallen, he could not survive. And I took the crown that was on his head and the band on his arm and have brought them here to my Lord. So this guy was obviously somewhere near the battle because he is able to produce the artifacts of Saul's line, his crown, his armband. Again, he's expecting favor from David due to his involvement in the death of Saul. David doesn't see it that way. Then David and all the men with him took hold of their clothes and tore them. This is a traditional sign of grief. They mourned and wept and fasted till evening for Saul and his son Jonathan and for the army of the Lord and the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. So now they're struck with grief over the death of all these people. David said to the young man who brought him the report, "Where are you from?" He said, "I am the son of an alien, an Amalekite," he answered. Okay. David asked him, "Why were you not afraid to lift your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" Uh-oh. Things are taking a shift. You're standing before me telling me that you are the one that killed Saul, even if he requested it. Why did you think it's appropriate for you to kill the one that God has installed as king? David has power. David has never himself taken the role of destroying the king on himself. He always has depended on God, God's timing, God's will. He's waiting for God to move. He knows he's anointed as king, but he's had two experiences where he could have easily killed Saul himself, and he refused to do it. Now this Amalekite shows up and says, "Well, I did it." Then David called one of his men and said, "Go, strike him down." What's the punishment for striking down the Lord's anointed? It's capital punishment. It's death. So he struck him down and he died. End of that guy. For David had said to him, "Your blood be on your own head. Your mouth testified against you when you said, 'I killed the Lord's anointed.'" In other words, justice is being served here by killing you for killing the one that God had put in place. David took up this lament concerning Saul and his son Jonathan. Now we hear from the heart of David. And he ordered that the men of Judah be taught this lament of the bow. It is written in the book of Jashar. "Your glory, O Israel, lies slain on your heights. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath." Remember, Gath is a Philistine city, not far from where David is living in Ziklag. "Proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon," again another Philistine city. "Lest the daughters of the Philistines be glad, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised rejoice." So in his lament, David says, I don't want the word of the victory over Saul to be celebrated among the Philistines, because they're going to rejoice and think that their God is more powerful than our God. "O mountains of Gilboa, may you have neither dew nor rain nor fields that yield offerings of grain, for there the shield of the mighty was defiled. The shield of Saul no longer rubbed with oil." He curses the ground, the region where Saul was killed in battle. "From the blood of the slain, from the flesh of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back. The sword of Saul did not return unsatisfied." Saul and Jonathan, in life they were loved and gracious. Now, doesn't that make you pause right there? David, don't you remember this is the guy that's been throwing his spear at you, that's been hunting you down like you're some sort of animal, chasing you through the desert, chasing you through the caves and the wilderness. And now you're proclaiming that in life he was gracious? Wow. Well, what does that tell you? David obviously counts God's move in somebody's life higher than the character that person exhibits. right? David obviously understands that Saul was mean to him. But nonetheless, in honor of the position that God placed Saul in, David honors him. And in death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. David's heaping praise on them. O daughters of Israel, weep for Saul, who clothed you in scarlet and finery, who adorned your garments with ornaments of gold. David is taking the position that the loss of Saul is a tragedy. And we would expect in humanness to think that the loss of Saul to David would be a victory. But no, he's admonishing the people to weep and mourn over the death of the one that the Lord appointed. It's not necessarily based in Saul's character as much as it is based in the fact that God had a servant that was slain. How the mighty have fallen in battle. And then David turns his heart to Jonathan. Jonathan lies slain on your heights. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. Listen, a lot of people would point to this verse and say, wow, that's proof that David's having some sort of homosexual relationship with Jonathan. But it's nothing like that. These two guys were extremely close because they had suffered at the hands of Saul together. You can read about it in 1 Samuel. They helped each other. They had that warrior spirit, both of them. Jonathan conquering as he climbs up the cliff to surprise attack the Philistines, David conquering wherever he went. They were willing to risk their lives to do what God wanted them to do. There was a bond there that was strictly platonic. There's nothing in Scripture that would point us in another direction. But nonetheless, there's a bond here that's closer than a brother. And David's feeling the loss of Jonathan tremendously. How the mighty have fallen. The weapons of war have perished. David knows that all the support he got from Jonathan is over. Now he's going to follow the Lord as the Lord will lead him into the throne room. It will become obvious that David is God's choice. There's going to be some political maneuvering, but in the end, God will establish David's throne, not just in 2 Samuel, but forevermore. We'll explore that as we go from here. God bless you, church. Serve him well today.
Who is it who for sinners shed his blood, and now for cleansing all can plunge beneath that flood? It's Jesus. But do you know who he is? He's the image of the invisible God, and he's the brightness of his glory, the first, the last, the future, the past.